The brilliance that came at a price. They shaped the modern world. They gave us electricity, rockets, medicine, DNA, and the theory of everything. Their discoveries ended diseases, lifted humanity, sometimes ended millions of lives. We celebrate them as heroes of reason, pioneers of knowledge. But behind their theories and experiments lie obsessions, betrayals, cruelty, and even destruction. This is not the version you learned in school. This is the version history tried to forget. In this episode of Lesson Lost, we reveal the dark sides of history's most celebrated scientists, the parts their textbooks left out, and the world quietly buried. High voltage sign. 1. Thomas Edison, the inventor who electrocuted animals to win, is remembered as the man who lit up the world. The genius behind the light bulb, phonograph, and motion pictures. A symbol of American innovation. But Thomas Edison had a darker legacy, one built not just on invention, but on fear, cruelty, and relentless ambition. In the 1880s, Edison entered into a bitter rivalry with Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse. At the heart of the battle was electricity, Edison's direct current, DC, versus Tesla's alternating current, AC. AC was superior, cheaper, more efficient, and Edison knew it. So he launched a campaign not of science, but of terror. To prove that AC was dangerous, Edison began publicly electrocuting animals using Tesla's technology. Dogs, cats, calves, horses, even an elephant named Topsy killed in front of a crowd, then filmed. The events were brutal. The message was clear: AC kills. It was propaganda, and it worked. Edison also helped invent the electric chair, not as a humanitarian tool, but as a weapon in his business war. He ensured the first execution used AC current, linking Tesla's name with death. Edison won patents. He built an empire. But behind the light was a man willing to kill in the name of power, both electrical and personal. DNA. 2. Francis Galton, the statistician who invented eugenics. He was a brilliant mathematician, a pioneer of statistics. He coined the concepts of correlation and regression to the mean. His fingerprints are on modern psychology, genetics, and data science. But Francis Galton also gave the world something devastating: eugenics, the idea that human populations should be improved through controlled breeding. Galton was obsessed with heredity. He believed that traits like intelligence, morality, and productivity were inherited, and that society should encourage the reproduction of the fit, and discourage, or eliminate, the reproduction of the unfit. He coined the word eugenics in 1883. And behind it was a vision of a world engineered for perfection, a world where some lives were worth more than others. Galton's ideas quickly spread. By the early 20th century, they were mainstream. Governments in the US, Canada, and parts of Europe passed forced sterilization laws, targeting the poor, disabled, mentally ill, and minority groups. Eventually, Galton's ideology became the scientific foundation for Nazi racial policies used to justify murder on an industrial scale. He died before World War II. But his theories lived on as tools of oppression, genocide, and state-sponsored cruelty. A man who helped measure the mind, but failed to grasp the value of every human soul. DNA. 3. James Watson, the man who found DNA and then destroyed his reputation. He helped unlock the blueprint of life. He co-discovered the double helix structure of DNA, and won the Nobel Prize for one of the most important scientific breakthroughs in history. But James Watson, once hailed as a genius, would later become a symbol of scientific arrogance, controversy, and racism. In the decades following his discovery, Watson became a leading voice in genetics. But he also became known for his provocative public statements that would ultimately destroy his legacy. In 2007, he told a British newspaper that he was inherently gloomy about the prospect of Africa, because he believed black people were genetically less intelligent than whites. He offered no credible data, only personal opinion, and was immediately condemned by the global scientific community. Research institutions cut ties. He was stripped of honorary titles. Even the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, where he had worked for decades, denounced him. Watson had made similar remarks before questioning the abilities of women in science, making offensive comments about sexuality, body weight, and even family members. He claimed to be a truth teller, a man unafraid of political correctness. But what he lacked was scientific humility and basic human empathy. The man who decoded our DNA forgot what makes us human. Brain. 4. Albert Einstein, the genius who failed at family, he was the face of genius. The man who redefined space, time, and gravity. He gave us E=mc², warned the world about nuclear weapons, and became a global icon of intellect and pacifism. But Albert Einstein's personal life was far less admirable than his public image. His first wife, Mileva Marić, was also a physicist. Some scholars believe she contributed to his early work, yet Einstein rarely acknowledged her role. Their marriage quickly turned cold. In one now infamous letter, Einstein laid out a list of demands for Mileva, including 1. You will bring my meals to my room. 2. You will not expect affection. 3. You will not speak to me unless spoken to. 4. You will leave the room when I request. They eventually divorced, and Einstein went on to marry his cousin, Elsa. But even in that relationship, he was unfaithful, having affairs with multiple women, sometimes writing to them while married to another. Worse still, he was emotionally distant from his children. His second son, Eduard, suffered from schizophrenia. Einstein never visited him in the psychiatric asylum where he spent most of his life. While Einstein inspired millions around the world, he often failed those closest to him. He could calculate the curvature of the universe but struggled with the basic gravity of love, loyalty, and presence. Radioactive. 5. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientist who built a bomb and watched it burn. He was called the father of the atomic bomb. The leader of the Manhattan Project, and the man responsible for the most devastating weapon humanity had ever created. But J. Robert Oppenheimer's genius came at an unthinkable price. During World War II, he led a team of scientists in Los Alamos, New Mexico, to build a weapon designed to end the war. He succeeded. On July 16, 1945, the first nuclear explosion in history lit up the desert. And as Oppenheimer watched the mushroom cloud rise, he whispered a line from the Bhagavad Gita. Just weeks later, the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing over 200,000 people, most of them civilians. Oppenheimer was hailed as a hero. But inside, he was tormented. He spoke out against nuclear proliferation. He warned of the moral consequences of what he'd helped unleash. And in doing so, he made enemies. The US government turned on him. They questioned his patriotism, stripped him of his security clearance, and cast him out of the very system he helped build. Oppenheimer had created a new kind of power. But he couldn't control it. And in the end, it consumed him. A man who lit the world. and couldn't turn it off. 6. Louis Agassiz, the scientist who used his fame to promote racism. He was one of the most respected scientists of the 19th century. A pioneer of glaciology, natural history, and paleontology. He founded scientific institutions, had mountains and towns named after him, and helped shape American education. But Louis Agassiz also used his prestige to spread one of the most destructive ideas in scientific history: scientific racism. Agassiz believed that humans were made up of separate species, each created individually by God, a theory known as polygenism. According to this view, different races were not equal, and some, particularly black people, were considered biologically inferior. He claimed they had smaller brains, lower moral capacity, and were destined for servitude. He used his scientific platform to argue against the abolition of slavery. Agassiz even commissioned photographs of enslaved people stripped, posed, and catalogued, to use as evidence of racial hierarchy. These dehumanizing images would later become infamous examples of how science was used to justify oppression. Today, Agassiz's name is still etched into school buildings, streets, and statues, though many are now being removed. He gave us tools to understand the Earth's past, but failed to recognize the humanity of those living in his present. A brilliant mind, blinded by ideology. High voltage sign, 7. Nikola Tesla, the visionary who died alone in obsession. He was the true genius of electricity. Inventor of alternating current, the Tesla coil, and countless patents that power the modern world. He dreamed of wireless energy, free electricity, and even death rays that could end war. But Nikola Tesla, once celebrated, died alone in a hotel room, consumed by paranoia, isolation, and unfulfilled visions. As a young inventor, Tesla was revered. He amazed crowds with electrical demonstrations. He was praised by Edison, then betrayed. He clashed with capitalists who saw no profit in his ideas. He refused to play the game of money and patents. And the world slowly turned its back on him. In his final decades, Tesla claimed he could 1. Transmit energy across the globe without wires. 2. Communicate with aliens. 3. Split the Earth with the right frequency. 4. Build a weapon of such destructive power it would end all war. He became obsessed with the number 3, walked around buildings 3 times before entering, and lived in a hotel room with a pigeon he claimed he loved more than any human. He died in 1943, in debt, his files seized by the US government, some of which remain classified. Today, Tesla is a cult icon. A misunderstood prophet of the future. But behind the legend was a man who burned too brightly and was left in the dark. Milky Way, 8. Stephen Hawking, the mind that battled the universe and the people around him. He was one of the most brilliant minds of our time. The author of A Brief History of Time, the physicist who reshaped our understanding of black holes, time, and the Big Bang. Despite a diagnosis of ALS at 21 and being given just a few years to live, Stephen Hawking defied all odds, living and working for over 50 years. He became a symbol of hope. A mind freed from the limits of the body. But Hawking's personal life was far more complicated than his public image. His first wife, Jane Hawking, stood by him for decades. She cared for him, raised their children, and supported his rise to international fame. Their relationship became strained as Hawking grew distant, emotionally cold, and often dismissive. Eventually, he left Jane for one of his nurses, Elaine Mason, a relationship that sparked deep concern among friends and colleagues. Rumors swirled of verbal and physical abuse, manipulation, and isolation. Multiple complaints were made. Police investigated, but no charges were filed. Later, even that marriage fell apart. And many questioned how such a brilliant man could overlook the suffering of those closest to him. He could explain the collapse of stars, but failed to manage the collapse of trust. Hawking's genius changed our place in the universe. But the universe within him remained a place few ever truly understood. Collision, 9. Edward Teller, the man who made the hydrogen bomb, and had no regrets. He was called the father of the hydrogen bomb. A brilliant physicist, born in Hungary, who played a key role in shaping America's nuclear future. But Edward Teller wasn't just a scientist. He was a man willing to build the most destructive weapon in human history and stand by it without hesitation. After World War II, when much of the scientific community turned away from weapons, Teller pushed forward. While others were haunted by Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Teller lobbied for an even deadlier bomb, one not measured in kilotons, but in megatons. When his fellow physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, leader of the Manhattan Project, opposed the hydrogen bomb, Teller testified against him, accusing him of being a national security risk. His testimony helped cost Oppenheimer his security clearance and his career. Many scientists saw Teller as a traitor, a man who sold out not just a colleague, but the soul of scientific responsibility. But Teller felt no guilt. He believed power was necessary. And that fear, the right kind of fear, was a tool to keep peace. He advised multiple US presidents, pushed for space-based weapons, and was instrumental in creating the arms race that defined the Cold War. He gave the world hellfire in a warhead, and never once looked back. Performing arts, 10. Richard Feynman, the genius who loved chaos more than people. He was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, a brilliant explainer of the quantum world, charismatic teacher whose lectures inspired millions. He helped crack the mystery of the Challenger disaster, and brought quantum electrodynamics to life. But Richard Feynman, for all his brilliance, was also known for his arrogance, emotional distance, and a life filled with provocation. Feynman treated rules, social, academic, even ethical, as optional. He hung out in strip clubs, played the bongo drums in bars, and bragged about how he could manipulate women into sleeping with him. In his autobiography, he described deliberately negging women, treating them poorly to get their attention. He was married 3 times. His first wife died young, and he grieved deeply, but he later admitted to being cold and detached in later relationships. His students admired him. His colleagues feared him. He had a way of making people feel stupid, not by accident, but by design. He was deeply skeptical of emotion, tradition, and social norms. To Feynman, the only thing that mattered was truth, even if it hurt others. He once said, but when it came to understanding people, Feynman often knew the name, and never cared to look deeper. Telephone receiver, 11. Alexander Graham Bell, the hero of the deaf who tried to eliminate sign language. He invented the telephone, transformed global communication, and spent his life advocating for the deaf community. To many, Alexander Graham Bell was a hero. His own mother and wife were deaf. He taught speech, founded schools, and developed new methods for the hearing impaired. But behind the admiration was a man whose vision for the deaf was not inclusion but assimilation. Bell strongly opposed sign language. He believed the deaf should be taught to speak and lip read only, even if it meant years of struggle and frustration. He viewed sign language as primitive, something that would isolate the deaf from mainstream society. Worse still, Bell advocated for eugenics policies. He warned that deaf people marrying other deaf people would create a deaf race, and pushed for laws that would discourage deaf-deaf marriages. He didn't just want to help the deaf live better lives, he wanted to control how they lived and who they married. Bell's influence led to decades of oppression in deaf education. Generations were forbidden from signing. Children were punished for using their hands to communicate. And a rich, expressive culture was nearly lost. He connected the world by voice but tried to silence one of its oldest languages. A man who changed how we speak, while denying others the right to speak in their own way. DNA 12. Rosalind Franklin, the forgotten genius whose work was taken. She was a gifted chemist and crystallographer. Her work helped reveal the structure of DNA, the very foundation of life itself. But Rosalind Franklin is not the name most people remember. Instead, the credit and the Nobel Prize went to Watson, Crick, and Wilkins. In 1952, Franklin produced photograph 51, a high-resolution X-ray image of DNA that clearly showed its double helix structure. Without her knowledge or permission, this photograph was shown to James Watson by Maurice Wilkins, Franklin's own colleague. Watson and Crick used it to build their model of DNA. They published first. They won the recognition. Franklin was left in the shadows. She died of cancer at age 37, never knowing how central her data had been to one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in history. Even in life, Franklin was dismissed by many male colleagues. Labeled as difficult, prickly, or uncooperative, when in reality, she was meticulous, independent, and unafraid to demand respect. Today, her legacy is being reclaimed. Her notebooks, photographs, and letters reveal a mind of precision and passion. But for decades, she was remembered, if at all, as an assistant. A woman who saw the code of life, but never lived to see her own name written into it. Brilliance and blindness, they discovered our DNA. Split the atom. Mapped the stars. Built the world we live in today. But behind the formulas, the lab coats, and the accolades, they were flawed, fearful, and sometimes cruel. They preached reason, but acted with ego. They served knowledge, but ignored justice. They changed the world, but not always for the better. Because genius isn't always noble. And progress often comes at a cost. Cheering megaphone, call to action, talk to your audience, speech bubble, which story shocked you the most? Leave your thoughts in the comments, we highlight the best ones in future episodes. Thumbs up, like this video if it made you rethink what you learned in school. Bell, subscribe to Lesson Lost for more hidden truths and uncomfortable questions from history. Because the deeper you dig, the more history begins to look back at you.